So what I want to talk to you today about is working with AI as a web developer or an engineer in general. I think there are a lot of models available to us now, which previously we would have had to develop in-house, and now there's a lot of APIs that we can hit to do a load of things that previously weren't available. So we can begin to develop products. There's a lot of limitations and a lot of issues I'm going to talk about, but we can begin to build things with this technology very easily. Within a weekend, I can pull together a new application which does something ever so slightly different with the power of this. So, give this a go. Who am I? I'm Kitson. I'm a senior web developer at Kin + Carter. I love to build things. Embarrassingly, in my spare time, I code for fun. I spent Christmas building an AI application, which is very boring for people around me, but I love to do it. So I'm very honored to have a job that I enjoy so much. It's really cool. And I'm mildly obsessed with building things with AI. So thank you for indulging me in talking about my favorite subject. Cool. So as has already been explained a little bit, there are a lot of challenges with working with artificial intelligence and in particular language models. They get confused easily. Like inherently, they're predictive language. So they work out what's going to be next in a sentence, and they hallucinate and they make things up. So the facts aren't necessarily the facts, but they sound great and they look great at a glance. So if you're not an expert, they're maybe going to look perfect, but they're really not. You can fine-tune models. So a lot of what OpenAI are trying to do is to make their models better and better. Adding data with fine-tuning doesn't necessarily make those models more factual about the subject. So they're still going to predict, they're still going to make things up, and they're still going to tell you a load of lies in the process. And the number of characters that you can send in your request and retrieve in your response is limited. So in every conversation we have with the model, we can't send all of the data that we have about the subject. We have to be quite specific about what we send to it. So what I want to talk to you today, before that, which kindly is being covered for me, large language models are basically huge amounts of data that let us understand, summarize, and create new content. But you already know that because 2 in a row. What I've been working with recently is attempting to add some additional context to a model. That might be company-specific data, it might be data of your clients, and isolating that away from our language model so that if in next month there's another model which is much better than GPT-4, we can switch that out and continue to do the same interactions with the model, but separate our data store and the context that's like important to us that we don't want to share with the world. That's our kind of like magic or money or thing about our application. And when we make a request to the language model, we can provide the relevant context and the question so that when it responds, it's much more likely to be factual because it has some specific text about the subject. So I think the phrase was, no demo, no fun. So I'm going to try and give that a go. 2 moments. And we'll see if the internet works. So in the screen here, you can see the playground from OpenAI. So this is kind of like a developer version of ChatGPT. On the left, you can have a system prompt. That's copy and pasted from OpenAI's system prompt for ChatGPT. On the right, we can begin to have an interaction with the AI. We can add user prompts, which are they don't necessarily have to be from the user, but they're from us as the developer. We can add assistant prompts, which are from the model, and you can kind of begin to manipulate the response that you end up getting from it. But ultimately, if you ask it a very niche specific question, Kin + Carter did a project for Kazoo, our client. It's not going to have a clue. It's going to either make something up or potentially tell me that it doesn't know the answer. So yeah, it doesn't have a clue. Cool. I'm going to just copy that same question and go to a model which I've created recently, which has a database of 864 pages scraped from the Kin and Carter website. So as much content as I can grab, publicly available, stored in a data store. And of course it doesn't work on a demo. Let's give that one more go. I have a backup video, so I'm prepared if this decides not to play ball, but let's give it another whirl. So yeah, it's going to go away. It's going to find from that 868 chunks of data the most relevant, and it's going to tell me some real specifics about a real project. And because I know all of the pages that I've scraped that data from, I can then provide back to the user the source of the data that I've used. So if I click this link, it's going to go through to our website, and this is the chunk of data that it used from my company website, and there are, hundreds and hundreds of them. I'm going to just ask you to believe me that there's not just one data source in there. Let's jump back in. So in a little bit more detail, what's happening is on the client, our user asks a question. On the server, we hit an embedding API from OpenAI, which gives us a question vector. The vector is a data representation of the meaning of that sentence. We then use that vector to query a vector database, and we say, give us all of the content, or maybe 10 pieces of content that are the most specific to the question. And then when we hit our completion endpoint or our check endpoint with OpenAI at the end, we send the relevant context plus the question, and it can answer much more factually and much less likely to hallucinate. So just define a couple of things. When you talk in front of people, you don't realize how dry your mouth will get very quickly, and there's lots of nods in the front row. In the context of AI, embeddings are a way of measuring how related text is. So it's an array of numbers. The closest of those vectors means something's very related. If they're far apart, they're not related. What that means is when we query a vector database, we can apply, or they can apply, a similarity metric to give us those most relevant chunks of data for our query. Generating embeddings with OpenAI is very, very simple. They have a Node library, they have a Python library, or you can just hit their endpoint with fetch or whatever your favorite way of hitting endpoints is. Ada is an embedding-specific model, which is much cheaper and easier to get a good result from. We store those embeddings in a vector database. In this example, I've used Pinecone because it's very simple to use. We have a unique ID of each chunk of data we store. If you want to update it later, if it's changed, or we want to remove it, that ID is useful. We have a value array, which is our vector. There's 1,536 values in each vector. And then we have the metadata, which is, in my case, the original text, how many tokens that represents in OpenAI terms, so that when I'm sending my context, I can pick the right amount of context and not have too much that I send in the request. And then I also, haven't included it, have the URL. So the query will send a vector, return the entire thing, and then that metadata is what I can use to send further down to OpenAI. The prompt that you create is probably one of the biggest influences in how useful these tools can be. This message array is similar to what you saw earlier in OpenAI's playground. So we have a system prompt first. The system prompt allows us to set the context. Previously, it was your ChatGPT, you're chatting to the world, you only know so much information. In this case, it's an expert in Kin and Carter. In my user prompt, I'm attempting to mitigate the chance of it telling incorrect facts. So I'm saying, if you don't know the answer, tell me you don't know the answer. If you haven't got it available in your context, don't try and make it up. It's not foolproof, but it works so far to do some simple things. And then to get our actual response that we send to the user is, again, very simple. I'd recommend using the OpenAI playground to play with some of these variables. It's quite a good environment to test prompts and to figure out what does and doesn't work for your particular situation. In some cases, you might want a very low temperature because you want the response to be very similar every time, and sometimes you might want a really high temperature so that you get completely different results each time. Maybe you're writing a long story and you don't want the same answer every time. You want to allow the model to go off-piste a little bit and get a little bit more creative. And that's the guts of creating this type of embedding. But beyond text to text, like, users are going to get bored of just seeing chatbot, chat response. What we're working on at the moment is giving models context of what resources it has available to it. So if you imagine in a website, you have user interface components that we can change. You're maybe on a list of cars and you ask a question about a specific car, then why can't the model change the user interface to show that specific model? The user asks then about colors for that car, and the user interface changes to allow the user to change the color for the car in front of them. I think Google recently at their talk this week were going into conversational commerce, which I think will be a big topic in the future, and allowing users to get to their kind of desired outcome, which is maybe a purchase or whatever they're trying to do on your site. The flip side and the challenge with this is it's difficult to prevent people from doing prompt injection. So if a few people asking the questions, you can hack effectively the system and get it to give you information that it's not supposed to give you, or to tell you things that are incorrect, and to potentially do harmful things. But I think most people are just trying to mess around with it and make it break. There are a few people trying to fix this. So NVIDIA released a guardrail system that we can put over the top of our models to begin to kind of validate inputs and to ensure that outputs aren't doing things they shouldn't. But that is the first version, and it's really not perfect. So it's going to take a bit of time before this is a secure thing. But like, people have been trying to hack the internet and technology for years. So like, it's just a matter of time before we begin to solve that problem. I think that's all I have. Thank you again for listening to me.
Worked out perfectly. And let's see what are the questions the audience has at this moment. See a question there in the back, and then we'll get to the person over there.
Hello. Hello. Using AI, do you think in the future that we can achieve the level to convert books into movies, like using now the new web GPU API?
I think image models have come a long way. I think video, by definition of how complex is versus just a single image, will take quite a lot of time. I don't see why models in video couldn't be developed that could create movies. I think it'll be a long, long time before they're the same quality of movies that we have right now, but there's some really cool examples on YouTube of people who've created like comic books or anime with some of this image stuff. It's a lot more kind of like stop motion than a fluid movie, but yeah, I don't see why not. I think it's quite there's a lot of possibilities.
Thank you.
Interesting question indeed. Let's go back to the person over there.
I saw your profile pictures that you have generated with the Midjourney, and it's really look like you take a picture with a phone or photo. How did you generate? Even the ChatGPT never saw you.
Yeah, I put Midjourney. It actually wasn't Midjourney. It was Stable Diffusion. So Stable Diffusion is an open source alternative to Midjourney. And what you can do with it is you can fine tune it on a particular thing. So I fine tuned a model on myself with 15 images in lots of contexts. And then when you prompt it like Midjourney, you reference me. So I say like, give me a picture of Kitson as an astronaut, wherever. So it took an entire day to do. Again, so boring on the weekend, like not out of the house. But yeah, it was really fun. Stable Diffusion is really cool, open source, which I think there's going to be a really interesting fight between open source systems. They've released a language model. Stability AI is the parent company. Those guys where they give it to the community and the community takes it places, versus OpenAI where it's kind of fixed and here's your API and you use it and you pay for us for it. So I think that's going to be quite exciting as it develops.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question I was also curious about, and indeed, I think you're right. We are about to witness like a titan war between different AI sources. We have time for one more question before we wrap it up. Yeah, I see a question over there, so that will be our final question for today.
Okay, hi. So what I was wondering is, on your opinion, how many years would it take for AI to replace developers? I mean, it's been 3 months that I started as a front-end developer, and if that happens, I'm the one being fired immediately.
Does it depend on the person or on the AI that is being replaced?
I think it's a good question. Like, however many months ago I watched the GPT-4 announcement from OpenAI, and I sat up at like, I don't know, it was only 8 p.m., 9 p.m., and I watched it, and he took a picture of a drawing of a website, and then it wrote the code, he put it in CodePen, and it worked. And I was like, wow. I'm trying not to swear. I was like, holy wow. And then I was like, cool, I'm going to build something with this, and I'm going to try and create a Chrome plugin. I don't build Chrome plugins. I don't know how they work. And it just went in this infinite loop of errors and failures, and I was like, cool. I have at least 1 year. Minimum, I have 1 year before this is going to begin to be a problem. I think it's going to be a long time before we're replaced, honestly. I think, as people have explained earlier, I think it's a tool. I think it's a tool that we use to do our job better, to be more efficient. We have Grammarly for words. We have autocomplete in Gmail. Like, I don't think it's going to replace us anytime soon. I think it's just going to take the menial, boring tasks. Maybe like some of the, like, no one wants to work with Fortran anymore or anything old. Like, maybe it's going to write that for us instead. Like, I don't think within the next 2 to 3 years we'll be replaced. So you've a career ahead of you, I think.
So I'm not getting fired.
Thank you for your questions and thank you for your answers. One more applause for Kitson, please.